Great. I'm Professor Green, and today we'll be talking about Chapter 15, Employees and the Corporation. The case study that they speak about here are nail salons in the United States. So there have been a lot of issues that have come up with when we talk about the employees at these many, many nail salons. They say that right now it's an $8 billion industry in the United States. So people have felt that nails is a great way to express oneself. And so many women mostly have gone out to get their nails done on a monthly or weekly basis. But what about those people who are actually doing your nails? If you've ever been to a nail salon, you know that there are a lot of it's a very toxic environment, right? That there are chemicals, they're wearing masks, there's a lot of dust flying everywhere. And so who's protecting these employees? This chapter will get into that. Before I jump into the chapter, I just want to make sure that we we speak about how these employees are often being paid a very minimal amount. It's an abusive working conditions. There's constant exposure to chemicals, as I mentioned. A lot of these employees are undocumented. They're Koreans and Vietnamese. The minimum wage is $19,000 a year, which is hardly enough to really live on. The barriers to entry to getting into opening up a nail salon are quite low. So as the book said, that most nail salons are less than 3 technicians, so it's really easy to open up. You grab one or two other people, and you rent a space, buy the furniture, the nail polish, etc. There's not a lot of money that you need to invest, and now all of a sudden you have a shop. But at the end of the day, are people really being looked at when they're working there? It's a very competitive market. That there are so many nail salons, and that nail salon is open and close very quickly. If they're not doing well, then they just shut down. And so this is all reasons why the salaries continue to stay low. OSHA has, of course, gotten involved, and they've encouraged, I should say, but they've really demanded that people wear gloves, masks, and there's good ventilation. But why I say only encouraged is because these ideas are often ignored. So let's talk about employees. We're going to first talk about the key learning objectives for this chapter. The first one is understanding workers' rights to organize unions and bargain collectively. So for those employees at the nail salons, if they wanted to create a union or if they wanted to bargain with their employer. We're going to talk about knowing how government regulations assure occupational safety and health and what business must do to protect the workers. We're going to talk about evaluating the limits of employers' duty to provide job security to their workers. We'll talk about analyzing employer obligations to pay workers fairly and how pay policies can contribute to income inequality. The fifth one is appraising the extent of employees' right to privacy. When businesses monitor employee communications, police romance in the office, test for drugs or alcohol, or subject employees to honesty tests. So there'll be a slide on each of those areas, and it'll be really interesting, I think, to look into policies that companies can set up to make their environments healthy and supportive. And the last one here is debating if employees have a duty to blow the whistle on corporate misconduct or if employees should always be loyal to their employer. Let's talk about the employment relationship. So here we talk about how employees are an important market stakeholder, right? From chapter 1, we talk about stakeholders. An employee is, in my mind, a huge stakeholder. They are responsible for carrying out the work of the company, and they're dependent on the employer for their livelihoods, right? So there's a partnership now between the employee and the employer. Starbucks has been noted in this chapter as one of the leaders when it comes to working on this employer-employee relationship. They said that, for example, they've now required all managers to give their subordinates at least 2 weeks notice when it comes to their schedules, and 8 hours between different shifts, right? So they can't close a Starbucks at 10 p.m. and then open the Starbucks up again at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, right? And so they need to make sure that they look after their employees. What are some of the major rights of employees? This is on page 330 of your text. This is to organize and bargain effectively. Another right of employees is to a safe and healthy workplace. So as you think about that case study with the nail salon, right, truly is it a safe and a healthy workplace? Another employee right is to due process on the job. So understanding how things work within the organization, and having a right to voice your concerns, to fair and decent wages, to privacy. We'll talk about that in this chapter, and to blow the whistle and free speech. And what does free speech truly mean when it comes to the employer? Workplace rights. So employees in the United States enjoy important legal guarantees. They have the right to organize and bargain collectively. This is all about unions. And I think we take a lot of these things for granted, organizing and bargaining collectively, that here in the United States we're a democracy, but in communist countries, that is not possible. In China, for example, they don't have an ability to organize and bargain collectively. They don't have unions for the most part. They also have rights to a safe and healthy workplace, and they also have rights to due process. Let's talk about the right to organize and bargain collectively. Striking. Employees have a fundamental legal right to organize labor unions and to bargain collectively with employers. Workers have a right to hold an election to decide which union will represent them, because there are different unions that they can join. Like, if you're a teacher, for example, at a particular school, there are many teachers unions. So then those teachers at that particular, like Redondo Beach, etc., teachers, they can choose which of the many unions that are available here in the South Bay they like to join. Labor unions are organizations that represent workers on the job. Labor unions have the right to negotiate wages, working conditions, and other terms of employment. Employers are required to bargain with unions in good faith, and if agreement can't be reached, then a strike might occur, as we mentioned. This is another slide here on the right to organize and bargain collectively. What is the influence of labor unions? And let's talk about the history of labor unions, because it has evolved so much over the past 100 or 200 years. This says here that in 2017, the median weekly pay of full-time workers who are members of unions was 20% higher than of non-union workers. So a good example of this is the construction industry. If you have a union electrician versus a non-union electrician, non-union electricians get paid a lot more, because the union fights for certain wages for the electricians. But at the end of the day, most general contractors, they will, if they're not on a government job, so if they're just building someone's house, for example, they will hire a non-union electrician because they can pay them a lot less. And so the electrician then has the choice whether they want to join a union or not join the union. And if they don't join the union, they have a lot more options to jobs. They can work on different types of projects. But if they join the union, then the union says that they can only work on union jobs. It's a whole other discussion, but hopefully that's enough information for you to help differentiate between how you'd have a union and a non-union worker in the same type of work. Also in 2017, only about 11% of all U.S. workers were union members. So in the United States, we don't have a huge union culture. This statistic would be a lot higher in countries like France, for example, where they encourage unions. The percentage was higher, 34% in the government employment. So if you work for the government, they have a lot of unions. It's just, again, part of the culture, part of the strategy of the government, I guess you could say. But in the private sector, just 7% were unionized. In my experience working in consulting and banking and engineering, I was never unionized. It's only when I went to go work for the state of California at Compton College as a professor, then I was then encouraged and I did join the union. In the wake of the Great Recession, elected officials in several states sought to weaken unions by limiting the rights of the public sector workers. So this example here is in 2017, Missouri joined 27 other states in adopting a right-to-work law. So this is talking about teachers, city and state employees, and this is where they are not requiring employees to pay dues in order to join the union. So they're saying that people can join the union, but they don't necessarily have to pay dues. So like if a teacher feels that they would like to join the union, but they can't necessarily afford to join the union, they still are able to join the union. Here at LMU, because we are a private organization, a private college, actually the teachers here don't have a union. We have a university senate, so there's a representation from the different professors in the university who come together to discuss issues, but we don't have a formal union, as I said, which is different from when I worked for the state of California. And the last slide here on the right to organize and bargain collectively, this says here that although unions overall remain weak, some groups of workers continue to organize. This example here is the Cleveland Water Workers joined the Utility Workers Union of America, so that they joined a really big, the UWUA is an affiliate of the AFL-CIO, and that's a huge union across the United States. And so these Cleveland water workers, they decided that that they wanted to join this large organization so that they would have a lot more power and a lot more voice when it came to their working conditions. And a major legislative goal of unions is labor law reform. So legislation that would make it easier for workers to organize. For example, shortening the time before an election of the leaders of the union, and also stiffening penalties for employers who intervene unfairly in the election process of the union. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more unions. These are the union rates in selected, again, industrialized countries. So I was saying, well, France is not on this one, but you'll see that Italy is quite high, Belgium, Sweden, and Iceland. I didn't realize that Iceland is 91% of workers are unionized. But when we talk about the United States, here only 10% of workers are unionized, as we've been speaking about in previous slides, and really close to the bottom here, right? Turkey has only 6.3% of employees that are unionized. The next slide here is the right to safety and healthy workplace. So annually, slightly more than 3 million workers in private industry are injured or become ill while on the job, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. And so obviously there's a problem with their safe and healthy in their workplace. The Occupational Safe and Health Act, passed in 1970, gives workers the right to a job free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. This law is administered by the OSHA, and since the agency's creation in 1970, the overall workplace death rate has fallen by more than 2/3. So this is on page 333 in your textbook if you're following along. So obviously we've gotten a lot more serious about making sure that people are safe in the workplace. This is if you go to a construction site, because the book doesn't speak about it, but I kind of assume that a lot of these deaths happened on construction sites. So now when you go to a construction site, as opposed to going in there, if you see pictures from the 1970s, right, nowadays, everyone is wearing a hard hat, everyone is wearing a safety jacket, everyone is wearing steel-toed boots, right? And so we're really concerned about keeping people safe. When we talk about white-collar white-collar jobs, or people like me working in academia or in a bank, obviously there's less concern for my safety, but there is concern for making sure I don't become injured. And a big trend in the early 2000s was better ergonomics. And so they came out with like better chairs that people could sit in so that you didn't have back problems and then the company has to go pay for you to go to physical therapy. Or in the last decade, the the desks that go up and down, right? So when you're working all day, you don't have to be sitting, you could be standing and still working at your desk. So that is a whole product that came out of this Occupational Safety and Health Act. Let's talk about now job security and the right to due process. What is due process? So since the late 1800s, the legal basis for the employee relationship has been employment at will. So this is where it's a legal doctrine. That means that employees are hired and retain their jobs at the sole discretion of the employer. However, equal employment opportunities and other laws prevent discriminatory termination. So this is saying that the employer can really fire you at any time in theory, but that you have a right to better understand why they would be firing you. So that's the right to due process. And that, as it says, there are laws to prevent discriminatory terminations as well, obviously, as we've spoken about in previous chapters. The next slide here on job security says that many union contracts say employees can be fired only for just cause. So again, this is why unions are so powerful, because they really, help the employees with job security. And workers have a right to appeal the employer's decision through the union grievance procedure. So if they find that they're fired for reasons that they find are unjust, they can appeal that. European countries and Japan have laws that extend just cause protection to all workers and not just union members. As I've spoken about in other countries like France and a couple slides ago, we saw Germany has quite a few unions. Even if they're not unionized, they still extend these laws because they feel that workers should be protected. So that is why when you fire someone in Europe, it's actually a really big deal, because they have a lot of rights when it comes to suing the organization for being fired. I had a girlfriend the other day, or a couple weeks ago, that got let go from her bank in Switzerland because they were kind of downsizing and combining two groups, and she got let go. And so in order to make sure that she didn't sue the organization for being let go, she got a huge package that paid her for, I think, 6 months of her normal salary while she looked for a new job. She also got amazing outplacement services. So she got 2 career counselors that will help her find her new job. And she was really supported by the organization to find a new role, either inside or outside of the organization. But there's really no role for her inside of the organization because she's at such a high level. But they wanted to make sure that she was taken care of, because the rights of the citizens in the EU and in Switzerland are so strong when it comes to being fired. So let's talk here a little bit about cultural values, traditions, and norms of behavior that also play important roles. So there's a social contract between employers and employees. This implies understanding between an organization and its stakeholders. Again, this is not a legal contract, but rather a set of shared expectations, right? And so again, when you get hired by a company, there's kind of an expectation that they will keep you on board for a certain amount of time. Also, one of the cultural norms in Europe is that there's a 3-month trial window. So when you get hired, the first 3 months gives both the employer and the employee to say that we're trying this out. And if the person gets fired within the first 3 months, they have less rights to sue, because there's kind of an official trial period. And also for the employee, if within the first 3 months you decide that you don't want this job, you can resign without a huge penalty, or without big bad, your reputation won't be ruined, because there's this cultural norm that these first 3 months are really trying on the job for both employer and employee. Let's talk about wages and income inequality, which is spoken again about other chapters, but we'll touch on it here. This is a growing issue with wage inequality, as we've spoken about. So what is the relationship between inequality and wages? What responsibility, if any, does business bear for the sharp differences in life circumstances between those at the top and bottom of society. So again, about CEOs having this huge wage, and then the regular workers having a really low salary, being able to barely keep up with the cost of living in their area and in their city. And then how should wages be determined, and what is fair? So workers in the sharing economy. In 2016, about 45 million U.S. gig workers, so these are Uber drivers, people who work for DoorDash, babysitters, they offered a product or provided services requested by a peer via an online platform. About a third of gig workers use this type of work for 40% or more of their income, which is great. It gives them opportunity and flexibility to do work on their own time and their own working conditions to a point. Some legislators have expressed concern that this type of employment arrangement can burden welfare and unemployment services if the gig does not pay enough to live on. Right? So that is really important, as we've seen that Uber has been criticized and has had to really justify their business model, because drivers for Uber have been saying that they drive a good amount of time, 40 hours a week potentially, for Uber, but they are not getting any benefits. And so then they still can qualify for welfare and unemployment services, and get both, because even though they're working full-time, they're not making enough money. There's another example here with Postmates, where the workers filed a lawsuit claiming that they were deliberately misclassified as independent contractors rather than full-time employees, where they would need to get benefits. So this continues to be a continuous debate as to how this business model is going to work in this, what they call the sharing economy. Let's talk about the income inequality in the United States from 1917 until now. So you'll see that the top 10% income share was at 40% in the 1927, around the Great Depression, and before the war. There was a disparity that CEOs were getting a lot of money compared to the median income for all of the rest of their workers. But then in 1942, the war came, and this leveled things out, and there was a middle class, and people were doing decently well. But here in the 1980s, all of a sudden the CEOs started to make a lot more money than the rest of the organization is going. It dropped a little bit, and then it went up and up and up, and now we're really high. That in 2015, there's a huge disparity when it comes to the CEO income and the rest of the organization. So what can companies do to address income disparity or income inequality? They can increase wages of their employees, right? As we saw in the case with Gravity, that he brought everybody up to a minimum $70,000 income. They can reduce pay differentials within their organization, so they can bring the CEO down and they can bring the workers up. They can talk about living wage. This is a wage that enables workers for their labors during a standard work week to support half the basic needs of an average-sized family based on local prices near their workplace. So this is what I was just speaking about a couple slides ago. So really working with what is that living wage in your society, in your community, and making sure that your employees can meet that living wage. And that's exactly what the Gravity CEO did. He looked around and he saw, oh my gosh, my employees, they can't have more babies because they can't afford it. They can't live close to work because it's expensive close to work, etc. So he increased their wage to make sure that they were making this living wage that enables workers for a standard to make enough money for a standard work week, etc. Companies that adopt such a good job strategy also reap benefits from doing so. So if an employee does a good job at their workplace, then they can make more money, and they have been successful with this type of strategy. Now here's a a graph that looks at the percentage of living wage covered by minimum wage, right? So minimum wage, which is like in California now, like, right, $17 an hour or something like this. So which states have the the highest the highest percentage of living wage covered by their minimum wage? And so you'll see here that California is at 50%, 57%. And so that's actually pretty high, that they've done pretty well with making sure that our minimum wage covers the living wage here. Some states, they are a country in their own, they don't have, potentially don't have a minimum wage, or they don't cover the living wage with their minimum wage here. These here in the Southeast, they don't believe in a minimum wage, and that's a whole other discussion about what minimum wage is and whether that should be a right or not. But as you can see here in the Southeast, they don't really agree with that idea. Yeah, okay, so hopefully that is interesting to you. Florida, 52%. Hawaii, also at 55%. Yeah, Arizona is at 64%, so one of the highest ones.